Welcome back to SQL Bits and Bytes. This is your MK, and you're going to see the troubleshooting best practices for Azure SQL Database. And today's topic is going to be resource health and availability issues. When we experience an Azure database down situation where you cannot access your database, right? One of the first step I would recommend is to check what happened to your database using the resource health check plate in portal, right? More likely you would have received a communication from Azure stating that whether your database went through an availability situation or if your database availability status is, either degraded or available or unknown. Those kind of communication would have been received directly from Azure. So the first recommendation when, as a user, if I'm not able to connect to my database, I would go and check, is my resource available based on what resource health status is going to show in Azure portal, right? So we're going to cover what that is, what are the different states or status, health status we have, and a little bit about 40613 error. That's the error we would receive when a database is not reachable, right? Because of an health issue, right? And or even if you're not able to connect to the database because of an issue at the gateway layer, right? Or something between gateway layer and your database node, right? Whatever happens that causes your availability or connecting to the database failure will emit a 40613 error for the user. You would see that in the application, or if you're connecting from SSMS or other client tool, or even from command line, you should see this error database, so and so on servers, such and such is not available currently. And it'll give you a tracing ID to share with the support to investigate further on that, right? So how we can tackle it? What are transient conditions and what are non-transient conditions? Transient conditions are the ones that lives or mean short-lived, right? Few seconds up to 60 seconds. And the non-transient behaviors are failures that continue to happen beyond 60 seconds for minutes or sometimes even hours, depending on some rare scenarios, right? And then we also touch base a little bit on retry logic and what are the best practices when you're applying retry logic with a simple example. So, okay, as a user, I'm going to have a connection failure. And the first thing I want to go and check is my resource health. So here I am in my Azure portal. This is my database. And I went through some failures, and I'm going to go down to my database. And on the left side, let's see something called the resource health, right? To click on this resource health, right, it would tell me what is the health status of my database, right? So the resource health determines the health of your SQL resource by examining the success, the failure of the logins to the resource, right? And you have to remember one thing, the resource health for SQL database resource will only examine the failures due to system errors and not for user errors, okay? If you are getting failures, something related to the application side of it or the client side of it, this would not help. So in this case, my database has been available. I intentionally failed my database a few times to show what are the health events you would see, right? So in this case, I experienced something, right? It is critical to understand what is the health event we received, right? As I said, there are few health status for our database available, right? So the available means my database has not detected any login failures due to system errors, right? We need to be very clear on that. On my SQL resource, I did not receive any login failures as a result of a system error, right? And I got few other failures, right? In this case, I have a degraded and an unavailable. Let's go one by one. If we look into this degraded, it's a warning sign, right? So the degraded means your resource health has detected majority of successful logins during that time frame, but there's very few failures as well, right? Which means there was a transient failure occurred on your database for that short window, right? and more likely, your connection is resumed, and you should not be worried about if you have a necessary steps taken to handle those transient behaviors. One of the best practices we should have is applying a retry logic into our application, right? And if you're connecting through other client tools to connect your database like SSMS and other Visual Studio and ADS, so just reconnect it to your database. You should be able to resume your connection on that, right? So degraded is more likely, or not, 99.9% of the time is a transient behavior, and it should be handled efficiently without any interruptions. And the other one is the unavailable. So that's, if you see that, this is a critical sign. That means something seriously went wrong in my database. It could be a planned event or it could be an unplanned event, right? So the planned event means like, the system updates, right? It could be an OS patches, or it could be a SQL update, right? Going through some deployments, right, across the region, and your region is affected as well. The unplanned ones are a hardware failure, or any kind of an infrastructure failure that is causing health issues on your database, right? So unavailable means the resource health has detected a consistent login failure on your SQL resource, right? And if your database is not available for a longer duration, or you're actively not able to reach your database, right, then we should contact support to understand what went wrong and continue from there, because there is no other steps we could do to bring that back online, right? We need to understand why you're not able to connect your database for an extended period of time. Could be health issue, or could be something else blocking your database availability, and not able to reach your database, right? So that's the one critical issue which you need to make, you need to follow up. If the issue is persisting, then you need to go and contact support. If the issue does not, then we need to understand what it is and then move forward, right? The other status which I could not reproduce it is the unknown status, right? That is also a warning sign. So the unknown health status indicates that resource health has not received, it's very careful, it has not received information about my database, right, for a certain period of time. So this is not a definitive state that my database went down, right? It is saying that the monitoring system on the Azure side unable to find or get the status about my database, and it's giving me the unknown health status. What it also means is, if your database is available, right, it's been working fine, no issues at all in your connecting to your database, but you saw this alert come up in email as well as in your RFC, more likely it's an issue with the monitoring system on the Azure side not able to reach your database to get information about the health status, right? That's why the unknown health status will also be a warning sign, right? So we need to be very clear on what are the health status are and how we need to understand each of those. Availability guarantees saying that, hey, during this time frame you had any failures, but your database status is available. That means I don't have to worry about the database health side of it or a system side of an issue. I need to focus more on the client side of an issue, right? That's what available status gives us, the green status. And if it's unavailable, then it's a very clear indication that you need to worry about it. And if the issue persists, contact customer support, and then they should be able to help you. But if you're getting the degraded and the unknown status, those are warning signs depending on what your experience on the degraded side. If it's like I got a 1 blip out of 100 successful connection, I got 1 failed connection, that will be treated as a degraded status, or 5 it will be degraded status, right? If that bothers you a lot to understand what it is, more likely it's a transient and you're not seeing it, you can ignore it, right? Similarly, unknown, if you don't see any failures on your databases, but you got this alert communicated to you, or you checked in the RFC, more likely it's a monitoring system side of an issue, right? And if you got an unknown status and you're not able to reach your database for an extended period of time, which is a highly a remote chance, then you should still be able to reach out to support for additional help. So having this clarity of what resource health offers is very critical to handle your availability situation. All right, let's go back. So what is this 40613 error, right? I can actually reproduce this using a simple force my database to fail. In this case, I have a batch file that will go and connect to my database, right? And goes in a loop, right? Let me see. This is my database connecting script, and it's going to go connect, and it's going to be, once it connects, it's going to say connected. Now, on the other hand, I'm going to use my client tool. This is my SSMS, right? I connected to my database under this server. That's the same server we looked in the portal. I'm going to issue this command. What this does is actually going to force a failover on my database, right? I'm going to just say execute. Just watch here. You see that? It's going to fail because it's picked up a new instance. It's going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds, about 6 to 7 seconds. Picked up a new, primary node, and then service came back online and started connecting to my database. This is a transient behavior. I forced the behavior, but I just wanted to show what happens behind the scene when it's a transient behavior, right? And how do we handle these transient behaviors, right? Let's go back to our portal. Our slides here, right? So the transient behaviors, as I said, any connections that, connection failure that is short-lived, any hardware failures or any form of system-side failures that live very shortly, right? Like I was just explaining in the demo, are treated as a transient behavior. What are non-transient, right? On the other hand, let's take a quick, look into that side, understanding non-transient behaviors. Imagine you have a very large database, right? And going through the exact same scenario which you looked into, a critical health alert, database become unavailable, right? When the database becomes unavailable, what are the things that happens behind the scene is critical, right? If the database goes through a failover because of any situation, whether it's a planned or unplanned event, right? It could be even an update SLO that you're performing on your side, right? That is, you're scaling up your database, or someone on the maintenance side performing a maintenance activity. Whatever the cases, when you are your database is going through an like a really big, long transaction, right? And all of a sudden you lose the connection. You hit the unavailable situation. Under these circumstances, what happens is, for your database to come back, first it needs to perform a long recovery, right? So it was doing something extremely big transaction, and then all of a sudden something went wrong. It disconnects, right? The service is interrupted. It needs to catch up, or it needs to roll back, right? So there is a long recovery operation that would happen on your database, right? And this recovery operation depends on how big your transaction was and what is the time it would take to complete the recovery. It could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours. And the challenge is, until this recovery is completed, you won't be able to access your database, even if this is business critical, right? And you wanted to bring your service back online with the help of a support. If the recovery is happening for your database as a result of a long-running transaction got interrupted due to this unplanned or planned maintenance event, right? You may need to wait until the recovery is completed before you could access your database, right? Those are the conditions we treat as non-transient conditions, right? And this can even happen. Someone accidentally does, update a server. Someone is performing a large transaction on our database, and someone says, hey, why are we keeping it in premium? Let's go to standard, scale down, or some other service level in the vCore model, right? Then the chances are you will go through the recovery process if you get stuck, right? And there was another question from people. They ask about, okay, when you say reconfiguration, what happens, right? What happens behind the scene? So 2 things, right? Whenever there is a reconfiguration happens, it's basically failovers, right? Failovers are one form of reconfiguration, where if you saw my command that I issued, right? I failed over my database, technically, right? Saying that, hey, go and, fail this one, and then pick a new primary, right? Failovers are reconfiguration in response to the failure of a running primary, right? So every SQL database comes with a quorum of a primary and 1 or more secondary replicas, right? And they have quorum depending on what service tier you have. And so failovers are reconfigurations in response to the failure of a running primary. That is one, right? And the other one is swap primary, right? Swap primary is also reconfiguration where the service fabric, right, the hardware piece of it needs to move a running primary from one node to another, right? This could be because that specific host is running out of resource, right? And they could not balance the load on it, so they have to move that to another one as part of a load balancing mechanism. Or it could be an update as well. You're performing an update slow on your database, so they need to move the primary, swap the primary. So that is swapping primary, but that's also considered as a reconfiguration. There's a, the another one is like the primary would not change in some situations, right? It could be just a blip of a restart where the primary still remains the same. It does not fail over to one of the secondaries to promote that as a primary. So these are the things happens behind the scene, depending on whether it's a hardware related issues or user initiated issues, those kind of stuff. Just want to give some information on the reconfiguration part. All right, coming back to this, right? So how do I handle transient behavior, right? How do I handle those small blips happens, right? So we have something called the retry logic, right? If you go to the Microsoft's public documentation, they have this retry logic example depending on what platform you're running, right? And one of the things that we always look for, or I've seen, or I myself experienced is, I applied the retry logic, but I still get into some kind of situation, right? When I looked into this deeper, I understood, my minimum interval set for my retry logic was, was like 2 seconds or 1 second, because I thought it's just a blip, right, to start. But the recommended minimum interval is 5 seconds, right? Why we say that? Because there's a condition called blocking period. When a connection pooling is enabled, and if we hit a timeout error, right, like something happened, you got a failure, right, or any other login errors happen. As a user, I'll be receiving an exception, right, thrown to me saying, hey, your connection failed. What happens in this case is the subsequent connections that we attempt will also fail for the next 5 seconds. And this period is called the blocking period. If the application attempts to connect within the blocking period, right, within that 5 second window, the first exception will be thrown again, and then the subsequent failure after a blocking period will result in another new blocking period. That means it's twice as long as the previous blocking period, and this can go up to 60 seconds, right? Which is something we don't want to be in. That's why sometimes, we may experience a transient failure even though we applied a retry logic, right? So it is essential to make sure that we apply a minimum 5 second interval. I have a simple demo here. Here's my application. And this is available in the Microsoft's public documentation. You can always go and use the samples depending on which platform you're running. And here's one. What this does, it connects to my SQL database, and if my application, and it just goes down and performs a simple select statement, right? And if this fails, if my connection fails, it will go and wait for, it'll do a retry, and it'll wait for 5 seconds, and then it will try again. It'll do it like for 4 times, right? And if all 4 times with a 5 second interval, if it still fails, it'll exit out of my application, right? But if it happens to connect in the first or second or third or fourth attempts, I resume my connection and then execute whatever I wanted to do. In this case, I'm going to execute the query here, right? So that's how simple this application is, just to show what is the behavior, right? Here I have intendedly failed my connection for the first time. It's going to throw an error now. I got a transient failure at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds technically, and then it connected to my database, and it's probably going to result the result. Here you go. This is my select statement result from my database. Right, pull the sys.objects results from here. Okay, so hope that helps. And so when we are connecting to SQL database, we need to understand some of those few things. I mean, the few things that we need to understand is what is our health status showing, right? And is my database is available? If my database is available, I need to focus on the client side. If my database is unavailable and it still persists, I'm still not able to access my database, I'm going to reach out to my support to get I'm going to reach out to Microsoft support to get that help. And if it's degraded or unknown, which are warning signs, right? Depending on what my experience on the database, am I seeing unknown, I'm still not able to reach my database, then I'm going to reach out to support. I don't see any issues, I'm going to ignore that alert. I'm going to continue using my database, right? Similarly, degraded majority of the time, your database was succeeding connections. It's just a blip of few times, that it would have failed. And it's 99.99% of the time a transient behavior, and you should be able to handle those transient behaviors by applying retry logic if you're using your application. And that's all about handling availability errors and how to use resource health and how to use the how to use the retry logic to handle the transient behaviors. Thanks again. And in the next video, I will come up with a new troubleshooting guide to handle a different scenario for Azure SQL Database. Thank you.